Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in this side event, which will be focused on discussing the role of nature in 2025 NDCs. My name is Jimena Pestegui. I'm a climate policy advisor for the Nature Conservancy. Today, we have a very diverse and interesting panel of speakers that will present different guidance documents around this topic, and then we'll also hear from Brazil and Indonesia. So it will be a pretty interesting one. So let me introduce our panel today. We have Carissa Kaspersek, Director of Climate Policy from Conservation International. We also have Fegi Nurbani, Deputy Director of Disaster Mitigation and Climate Change Adaptation, Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries from Indonesia. We also have Hasib Bakhtari, Lead Consultant Climate Focus. We also have Damian Fleming, Deputy Lead Forest Practice WWF International, and Marcelo Morandi, Technical Advisor for Brazil on Agriculture at UNFCCC. Thank you, everyone, for joining. So just to frame a bit the context on why we're talking about nature-based solutions in NDCs, if we look at the current data that even NDC Partnership has around the role of nature in NDCs, we see that with every round of enhancements, there's been an increase in nature and nature-based solutions and targets in NDCs. NDC Partnership data even points that 96 out of the 101 NDC Partnership country members have incorporated some sort of nature-based solution in their latest NDC. However, we've seen that numerous opportunities still remain to enhance targets and to really address all types of ecosystems within NDCs. We see that there are still, in many cases, some ecosystems, for example, forests have been more commonly included in NDCs when compared with other ecosystems such as seagrass, mangroves, etc. So there definitely is an opportunity to expand the scope of ecosystems that are included, but also we see a lot of opportunities to expand the range of solutions and the quality of targets included in the NDC. So throughout the presentations today, you'll see many suggestions and guidance on how to advance in this line. Another key important context to mention is that the role of nature in NDCs was strongly mentioned in last year's GST. So we saw, I can't read from here, but we saw clear calls for addressing the biodiversity and climate crisis together, for enhancing instruments such as NDCs and MBSAPs, ensuring more coordination, and for really making sure that nature-based solutions are at the heart of enhancement cycles. So with that context, let me pass it to the first speaker, Carissa, who will introduce a guide to including nature in NDCs that we launched this week under the Nature4Climate Coalition, which is made of many different organizations that have joined forces to really try to provide practical guidance on this topic, using 15 key recommendations kind of as the guiding points for it. So Carissa, all yours.
Thank you so much, Jimena. It's a great introduction to this guide, which has been many months in the making. Some of you may have heard about it. We started talking about this in Bonn, actually, and we had a consultation with governments, because the idea for this guide is for it to be as useful for governments in their 2025 NDCs as possible. So it's really meant as a tool and a resource, hopefully relatively evergreen as well for policymakers as they're putting together their NDCs and thinking about nature and a lot of cross-cutting issues that we know go along with nature, biodiversity, indigenous peoples' rights, and a variety of those things with nature-based with nature and NDCs. And there's a QR code here for you guys to go ahead and take a look at it, and I'll go ahead and get started kind of talking about it. So, right, so as Jimena said, we have 15 guiding points, and these go across all of the stages of the NDC cycle. And so to start with, right, when countries are thinking about their NDC, they have to think of, well, what do we have, right? What's in the 2020 NDC? So we have 5 steps there around preparing to include nature in your NDCs. And one of these really important steps is around thinking through what's in the NDC, where are opportunities to increase, nature. And one of the really important parts of this as well in identifying opportunities is making sure that you have a whole of government and a whole of society approach. for nature in particular, it's a very cross-sectoral issue, right? We need to make sure that agriculture and forestry and fisheries ministries are talking to each other and really agreeing upon principles for developing the NDC. You need to make sure all of the stakeholders are involved, indigenous peoples and local communities and fishers and farmers, that their voices, the ones who are really implementing the nature-based solutions on the ground, that you're getting buy-in for the types of actions that they need to be implementing. And so once you're going through all of those things, that you've consulted with the government, you've consulted with society, you've identified what's in the NDC, where are opportunities to enhance nature in the NDC, then you can think through, okay, are we going to focus on mitigation, focus on adaptation, focus on loss and damage, focus on increasing coverage, focus on increasing the quality of targets. There's so many different entry points for countries to really think in a nationally determined manner, where do I want to focus for including nature in my NDC? And so that's really how the guide is kind of, it's laid out in this idea that countries can go point by point based on where they've identified they want to focus. And so once those entry points have been identified, right, then there's still a lot of data and information gathering that needs to happen to be able to put together quality NDC targets. And so we have a variety of tools and resources around spatial mapping, thinking through where our biodiversity and climate hotspots, thinking about ways to enhance the baseline, and thinking through, maybe where's the deforestation trajectory going, and how can we reduce it. So there's a whole bunch of things around information collecting within these first steps. So then once you've kind of gone through all those preparation steps, then you can really think about getting down to what are the targets going to be. And for nature, in a lot of countries, right, we know that countries need to be moving towards economy-wide targets, and so we do talk about making sure that nature is maximized within 1.5 aligned economy-wide targets. But a lot of developing countries still are not ready to set economy-wide targets or set greenhouse gas targets for nature. And so we have a variety of different recommendations around setting policies and measures targets, around trying to think through quantitative targets such as area-based targets or length-based targets for rivers and those types of things that, again, can help increase quality and specificity of targets, even if there still isn't quite the level of greenhouse gas data available to set specific greenhouse gas targets. And one of the really important things, as Jimena mentioned, is making sure that the coverage of ecosystems is really being maximized, and that countries are taking advantage of all of their carbon sinks and stores, and reducing drivers of land degradation, deforestation across all of their ecosystems, especially within the mitigation target, but also in adaptation, right? And for adaptation, we've got a variety of different recommendations around setting targets in line with the framework that was agreed last year, which recognizes, the importance of adaptation in ecosystems and for biodiversity, for cultural heritage, but also things like infrastructure in different, different sectors where, adaptation and natural resources are being affected by climate change. And so, some great resources there. And then a new place that I think countries will start thinking about a little bit more this year is loss and damage, and how to include targets around addressing loss and damage in their NDC. What's the effect on ecosystems and biodiversity, and how can those be mitigated in a proactive manner? And then also thinking through, what's the role of nature in helping address loss and damage? Where have there been hurricanes, and where can we use things like green-gray infrastructure, like hybrid approaches, to build back better after some of the disasters and events that have happened? Oh, one more. And then finally, thinking about integrating nature into non-land use sector targets. So this is around, making sure that renewable energy is sited properly so we're not harming biodiversity. Thinking through nature across the entire food system, and waste and a variety of different things there. Then we have a couple points around cross-cutting guidance. One of these is really focused on this idea of making sure that the NDC is aligned with other national targets that are relevant, national development plans, national biodiversity strategies and action plans, LDN, like land degradation neutrality targets. There's so many different national instruments that the NDC should be aligned with. And we have a specific call-out section in resources on aligning with the global biodiversity framework and mapping through that. We have one target on just really making sure that there's kind of coherence and consistency across the whole NDC in terms of land targets between mitigation and adaptation. Making sure that they kind of just, it's a gut check. Do these make sense? Or are all of a sudden, are we setting targets that, would have a land footprint that are larger than the size of our country, right? Just kind of those things. and then really important is this idea of applying a rights-based and climate justice lens across the whole NDC, and some resources and recommendations there. And then finally, 2 points around financing and implementation. How do we make sure that the NDC is implementable and that, especially for developing countries, will attract finance? And so some recommendations there around kind of setting process-based measures targets around developing enabling conditions, things around, if countries are going to use Article 6 mechanisms, what kind of steps do they need to do to set themselves up for success there? And then, setting up kind of frameworks and mainstreaming around implementation and financing.
Thank you, Carissa. It's great to hear the 15 points. And now I would like to pass the mic to Feji from Indonesia. We would love to hear, considering the 15 points that Carissa mentioned, and based on your experience in trying to strengthen the inclusion of coastal ecosystems in NDCs, could you share some of the ways you're approaching the process and some of the opportunities and challenges that you've encountered while doing so?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know. That would be me the first time. Yeah, okay. When we're talking about NDC, I'm sorry, but Carissa, I haven't heard about this before until you sent me last night, so I'm sorry. But it is nice to have this, because I think when you are talking about I'm from the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries, so when you're talking about ocean and NDC, it seems like people tend to okay, mangrove, blue carbon things is going to follow sector, right? But we want our own sector because we think that ocean is bigger than that, bigger than only the forest, under the forest sector. Actually, the last few years it's been like a pilot, a long journey for us, how to include the ocean sector into the NDC, because in our last NDC, the enhanced NDC in 2022, we already have mangrove, but it's under the forest sector. And then for the adaptation, we have coastal ecosystem in general as part of ecosystem and landscape resilience. So it's already there, but it's not very, how to say it, not very strong. It's not very blue. So it's more like, yeah, it's an environment, it's nature-based solution, but we want to make it bluer. So we have time, to like doing a lot of research, collaboration, also one of them with CI actually, and KI, Konservasi Indonesia, the Indonesian CI. And I think that means a lot for us because it gives us a lot of a chance to collaborate and discuss about the ocean sector. I want to highlight one of the workshop that is with Jill Hamilton, because it will we are inviting 4 countries representatives that sharing about their NDC related to the ocean sector, and I think we highlight a lot of things from that, and we're going from there to and moving forward to discuss it with our national focal point. And for the second NDC, we are preparing it now. We agree to put the 6th sector, the ocean sector, under the mitigation. And for the adaptation, I think we are still in the same resilience, still the ecosystem and landscape resilient, but we put more focus on not only mangrove, but also for seagrasses and also the coral reefs. So we put more attention to it. So, and then back to the mitigation, under the ocean sector, we add seagrasses as a subsector. In doing so, we have a lot of homework actually, because we have to like submit the inventory and everything, while we find a lot of gaps also in the process. First, we don't have the national seagrass map for Indonesia. So it's been a challenge. So we are trying to keep up with that, and hopefully this year we can have that map, the national map. We have a lot of cooperation with a lot of agencies, also universities, including Queensland universities, the Gajah Mada universities. So we involve a lot of stakeholders in the process for only for the map. But the inventory is another challenge because apparently our researchers more focus on mangrove carbon, not seagrass carbon. So data on mangrove is very, very valid, but when it comes to seagrass, you see a lot of different numbers. So we are trying to strengthen that gaps, that points, and we are in the process on that. And then we also have some challenge on the database. The data is scattered everywhere. A lot of it is owned by several agencies, and we need to put it into one. And that's also, yeah, a challenge. And then the regulation. The act, the government regulation, and also the technical one under the ministry. So we are preparing all of them in like a parallel way, because we cannot wait one to another, because the time is clicking, so we need to be hurry and things like that. And okay, our last communication with the national focal point is that we put the sector, but we still hold the number. So it will be in a narrative way, the qualitative way, but it's already there. And when we are ready, we will put the number, the reduction number there. I think that's what I can share about our NDC. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. I think that's a great example that pointed to many of the considerations that Carissa was mentioning, right? The multi-stakeholder collaboration, the need to enhance data to hopefully use the most updated information to inform target setting. The challenges also in mapping regulations and gaps in regulations that could also be addressed through the NDC roadmap that you'll work on. So it's a great example, and also expanding to seagrasses. So thank you for that. And this is a great example around coastal ecosystems. But now I would like to pass it to Hasib, lead consultant from Climate Focus, who with WWF has been focusing a lot on food systems and NDCs. So Hasib, could you please share some of the guidance and gaps that you've identified through the work that you've done with WWF?
Thank you so much. This works, right? Okay, good. Thanks, and thanks for having me here in this great panel. And thank you for your interest in NDCs. I'm really happy to see such a passionate group of people and a growing group of people interested in NDCs and using NDC as an entry point in transforming our not only food system, but also transitioning towards a nature-positive future. I don't know about you, but over the past few days and over the past few COPs, I've been hearing a lot about a whole of government approach, a whole of society approach. And I always think, okay, what does that really mean? And what could that look like? And together with Martina, WWF, and as we have been working a lot on food systems, and we realized that food system and food itself as a cross-cutting issue, whether it's health, whether it is ecosystems like forests or mangroves or oceans, whether it's waste, you name it, it cuts across all sectors. And if we want to take a whole of society approach, a whole of government approach, we need to take a food systems approach to policy making and policy implementation. And the levers, all the levers for changing different sectors intersect in food systems. That's why over the past 4 or 5 years now, together with WWF, Climate Focus, and a large group of partners, we have been pushing for a food systems approach to NDCs, but also broader policy making, national adaptation plan in BSAPs, LDNs, and others. We have seen some some progress. We have seen, for example, food systems made it its way into, well, in some form in the global stocktake last year. We have food systems in the GBF targets. But when it comes to NDCs under the Paris Agreement, there's still a long way to go. And when I say, or when we say food systems approach, it means not just agricultural production, not just fisheries, not just aquaculture, but also what happens beyond the production level. So what happens in the supply chains, whether we have resilient value or supply chains, what about food loss in supply chains? How about consumption, whether it's at household and food institutions, like gastronomy sector or in public procurement? And what about a just transition or just transformation of food system, the role of family farmers, smallholder farmers, and indigenous people? All of these need to be considered when we say a food systems approach. And that's what we have been doing. We have been tracking NDCs and whether they actually have considered this food systems approach or not. And well, the picture, as you see probably on the slide, I really don't, but I can tell you, I think I remember the numbers. We looked at the NDCs, 146 NDCs recently, the updated versions of the NDCs, and we found that the food systems approach is largely absent. Some NDCs consider various components of food systems, but no, well, only 5 NDCs actually take a more holistic approach. So 5 NDCs consider food production, supply chain, and dietary shifts or food sustainable and responsible food consumption, while only 9 NDCs, is that right? 9 NDCs only include food loss and waste and consumption, and only 25 NDCs include production and food loss and waste. That's small numbers when we consider the 146 countries or NDCs that we looked into. That means we have a long way to go, but fortunately there are a lot of tools and a lot of tools coming out for nature, for water, for mangroves, for food, and although we have a long journey, but I think there are the tools and we are well equipped to change those numbers. One of those which we published last year at COP29 in Dubai, and we have expanded and updated it this year, which we launched a few days ago, is a toolkit. This is not a tool, but a toolkit, which means it includes many tools, many case studies, many good examples of NDCs, NBSAPs, national adaptation plans, and how they integrate food systems. It also includes concrete projects on the ground, how they were designed, what kinds of objectives and activities they had, and how they were implemented, and what the impact was on food systems. And all the initiatives, including a group of tools from the NDC partnership who are our partners on this toolkit and on a lot of other projects, obviously, and many more initiatives. We have compiled these in one place to help policymakers navigate around these numerous tools that we have developed over the past few years for food systems. So that's one toolkit, and within that toolkit resides one tool for food systems and NDCs that WWF, Climate Focus, FAO, UNEP, and GIZ and other partners we have been working on for a bit over 1 year now, and it's called Food Forward NDCs tool. It is a web-based policy tool. It is interactive. It provides 30, which will be growing, policy options, and I use the word options strongly because we wanted to clearly provide a suite of options for governments and policymakers and not prescribe anything. So it provides 30 plus policy options grouped across 5 different intervention areas in the food systems. So food governance, the multi-stakeholder approaches, agroecological landscape planning, and others through cost accounting, for example. It includes food environment, how we can change the conditions that can enable responsible and sustainable consumption, just transition for smallholders, better access to healthy food and sustainable food. there are policy options in food production that's on farm, but not just farm. So it's not just agriculture, but also fisheries, aquaculture, but also not just practices related to food production, but also the energy. What are the renewable energy measures at the production level that can be deployed to avoid dependency on fossil fuels, for example, in production, whether it's in fisheries or agriculture again. It also includes measures in the supply chain for reducing food loss and measures in at the consumption level for shifting to sustainable healthy diets and procuring sustainable and healthy food, as well as reducing food waste at the household and different sectors. So that is one tool, and we are expanding this, and it's a living tool, and we will continue to work on this, hopefully with all the partners that we have and more who are present in this room, to make sure that we capture the necessary policy options that are out there or that are being developed by researchers that can guide policymakers in enhancing their NDCs, but more crucially, implementing their NDCs, because this is not just one policy and the description of policy, but more concrete measures, how that policy can be implemented, what are the climate benefits, mitigation, adaptation, what are the sustainable development benefits, but also what are some of the potential trade-offs and how they can be mitigated in implementing those policies, and what are some of the monitoring tools to monitor the implementation, but also maybe quantify the mitigation outcomes, and case studies, which is, again, very important. We have videographed case studies of projects in several countries that WWF works that's there, and we have interviews with farmers and so on to showcase how they are implementing some of these food system measures on the ground in different sectors, again, not just agriculture. So and lastly, we are expanding this again to also include biodiversity, because, well, food system is the key driver of biodiversity, and also 90% of tropical deforestation is driven by food systems, and of course the biodiversity that is in the tropical forest. So we are going to expand this next year to include additional guidance and tools and examples of how BSAPs can be implemented in food systems, and how and to what GBF targets those different policy options can contribute, and what are the indicators that can be used to monitor progress towards different GBF targets. And maybe lastly, this has been rolled out by WWF and with our support and partners in different countries, 6 countries, I think, Martina, if I'm not wrong, and it's going to be rolled out again in 7, 8 countries, where we will hold 2 days, 1-day workshops with policymakers and other stakeholders, bringing them together, discussing the tool, but also applying it concretely to the NDCs and national planning of the country, and putting some kind of more long-term or permanent committees or groups in place in those countries to take this forward and in the next round of NDC and the round after that.
Thank you, Hasib.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So that was a great, super interesting presentation around, you mentioned implementation, not just target setting, you mentioned monitoring and evaluation, and it's great that you're also testing it in different countries. That's great to hear, and hopefully we'll hear from those different experiences. So now I'm going to pass the mic to Damian Fleming, Deputy Lead Forest Practice, WWF, so that he can walk us through some of the gaps that are still present when it comes to forest targets, and hopefully also share some guidance around that.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. We have some seats here at the front if people want to,
please feel free to
sit down. We're very friendly. So I know there are many COP veterans here. This is only my second COP, actually. My first and only COP before this was Glasgow. And for someone working in the forest space was incredibly exciting. I mean, it was where we had the Glasgow Leaders Declaration, we had the Forest Pledge, lots of billions for forests, and it really felt like, wow, this is an amazing moment. Now forests and climate are really being talked about in a more integrated way. And I think in COPs that I haven't been at and in other places, it really, a lot of momentum building around climate and nature, and it was really very exciting. So I think it's been a bit of a reality check here. Despite some really good events in places like this, it does rather feel that nature has been more absent this year in the COP at such a critical time. So I think there is still much case making to be done for the role of forests and nature more broadly on the climate agenda. And that needs to be done between now and Belém, and the next round of NDCs obviously is a really critical moment on that journey. So last week, with Climate Focus and with Trillion Trees, WWF launched a report looking at the role of forests, or the integration of forests in NDCs, and also, like some of the other reports, really made some concrete recommendations for policymakers. It's great to see that it's had some good pickup in the media, especially today. So people obviously do care and do think this is important. But the bottom line, as I'll go on to show on this slide here, is that actually, despite the fact that there's very wide recognition of the role of forests for climate mitigation, for climate adaptation, for biodiversity, for nature, actually for health, for security, what we're seeing is that in current NDCs, the integration of forests is really inadequate. And so there's much work to be done in the next round of NDCs. So you can see some of the findings here on the slide. So less than 50% of current NDCs have a specific forest emissions target in them, and only 2% of those mentions primary forests. And we know the criticality of primary forests, intact forests, for all the different ecosystem services I've just mentioned. Glasgow Leaders Declaration talked about the need to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030, yet only 28% of NDCs have a mention of deforestation, and only 4% of those mentioned about the role of deforestation and conversion-free supply chains. Only a third of MRV, or in the MRV section of NDCs, only a third talk about forests. So I think that's getting to the heart of some of the issues around quality there as well. Some areas fare better. So I think in the slides that you showed, Carissa, that talked a bit about protected areas, biodiversity, actually things like gender are faring better. Restoration is in over half of NDC. So those areas where, I mean, again, not perfect, where we do see some better results. But I mean, the bottom line is that they are insufficient and a real lack of specificity. And we know how important NDCs are going to be in really setting direction and ambition for different sectors within countries and also non-state actors. So, this is a real issue. So on to the next slide. So this last slide, really just some of the recommendations that are made in the report, again, hopefully to guide policymakers and other actors. So, of course, the first one is that we need to elevate the forests within NDCs. Again, recognizing the critical role that forests play. Around about 20% of the mitigation potential, according to the UNEP emissions gap report, will come from forests. So we're not going to meet Paris targets without much more ambitious NDCs. And again, within that, the role of primary forests. Again, I mentioned the Glasgow Leaders Declaration, which was then transposed for the first time last year at COP28 into the global stocktake, which again kind of sets the direction for the next round of NDC as we see halting and reversing deforestation in the global stocktake. So we this is an area where we really need to see more ambition. Most countries, we know we have a massive deforestation issue. The global deforestation rate at 6.4 million hectares in 2023, and that was up from 2022. So we're really moving in the wrong direction. So we have to see more ambition here. Carissa and also Steve talked about the need for synergies. So only around a third of the current NDCs talk about national policy integration between, for example, NDCs and MBSAPs. This is something that was called out in Cali as a priority. So another area where we need to see more ambition in NDCs going forward. And another critical point is really this point around specificity. Credibility of the NDCs will come around from having very specific and smart targets. So it's no good just talking about deforestation and finance and things unless we really set some really smart targets around them. So we need to see much more specificity within the rounds of NDCs. We need to improve and simplify accounting. And perhaps the last point, which Jimena opened with, and I just came across from the high-level panel looking at forests. Well, again, good that leaders are talking about, or ministers are talking about the importance of forests and forest finance. We know we have about a 460 billion per year finance need in order to meet the Glasgow Declaration. So we really need, I think, as others have mentioned, as Carissa mentioned, we really need to have policies and frameworks within NDCs that really help to set the enabling conditions for private finance. And it's great, I think, that the Brazilian NDC has a large amount then there on forest finance and some policies and different mechanisms and enabling conditions for those. So we need to see much more of that in NDCs. But I'll stop there, I think, because I'm sure we'll get into more of this in the Q&A.
Thank you, Damon. That was a great reflection around forests. And just to highlight a couple of points that I think align very well with what we've been talking about is the fact that you mentioned the Glasgow Declaration. One of the key points that we also recommend is hopefully for countries to really also look at what is the political momentum and push that has happened in the past years through the GST and through these calls for action, and hopefully to make sure that that also helps to drive that ambition at the national level. The synergies being another point, right, that was strongly emphasized in Dubai and now in Cali. So it's great to also hopefully use those pushes that are happening internationally to encourage national action. And I love your focus on specificity and smart targets. That's something that we also see that's a key gap that we must see to also create greater confidence on the instrument. So thank for that. And with your comment around finance and implementation, I would love to pass the space to Marcelo. We know also Brazil released the NDC. So it would be great to hear from you. And considering the reflections and the recommendations that we've been providing, what opportunities and challenges do you see right now in the case, for example, of Brazil, in terms of continuing to strengthen ambition, and especially as it relates to implementing NDC targets?
Thank you for the opportunity to share here. We just released our NDC a few days ago here. The fact is that Brazil is setting a new number, a new target of reducing net greenhouse gas emissions. It's not really a number, it's a range. It's from 59 to 67% below levels of 2005 as a reference. So the document is a really high comprehensive 44-page test. So it's a good read when you fly back to home. Yeah. So I heard several different analyses from this NDC. Ranging from it's not ambitious enough, it's so ambitious that you cannot afford, it's realistic and feasible. So just to see how these things are interpreted by different people. So ambitions has several faces. It's not only a coin with two faces, but there are several faces, yeah? But it's important to take into account. So I just want to recover some principles from the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement that can be useful for our discussions here. It's mainly on Article 2 on UNFCCC and Object 2 of Paris Agreement. We have some pillars on this convention and agreement on just well-known pillars like mitigation, adaptation, technology transfer, capacity building, and finance. But all these pillars should be integrated to guide the ambitions of the countries on some conditions. And these conditions take into account economic development, food security, social equality, just transition, or climate justice, and the common but the differentiate responsibilities. But we have some common goals. I'll just highlight three here. We have the ambition to keep the temperature 1.5 at maximum from now. We must tackle hunger and get food security. And we have to conserve the nature and biodiversity, including forest, but not only forest. Like in Brazil, we have 6 different biomes with different biodiversity. Not all are forests. but all should be conserved. Yeah. So our challenge or the main question is, what is the way to integrate all of these dimensions into a country commitment? So how to translate it into NDC? And more specifically, I'll talk here about the agriculture, food systems, and forest. Yeah. The Brazilian NDC addressing these topics in key commitments that I will highlight here very quickly. The first one is land use and planning. So the integration of land data, regularization of land use, and deforestation control. Energy transition, and sustainable development that include food security, that include agriculture, and so on. So we have different policies in Brazil to tackle and to deal with these commitments. So this includes several policies for example, for the validation and strength of our forest code by means of our tools, that is the Rural Environmental Registry. That it's a tool that each farm in Brazil must have this registration, and this is a landscape approach tool on how you use the farm areas for food production, for conservation, and for watershed restoration, and so on. We have some targets for forest restoration and conservation. So we have this target for zero deforestation by 2030. And we have another target for recovery of 12 million hectares by 2030 of natural vegetations. And for agriculture, we have the low carbon agriculture plan with different technologies to improve sequestration of carbon in agricultural areas, and to reduce soil loss, and to keep soil health, and to keep soil productivity. So it's already a landscape approach technology. And we have some national programs to strengthen family farming. Brazil has more than 5 million farms, and 80% of that are small farms, less than 50 hectares. 50 hectares for us is small. Yeah, okay. Just to and so these are the most vulnerable farms. So we have a specific program to improve productivity, improve bioeconomy issues related to these small farms, and bring them to the social and economic development markets. Yeah. And so you have some other national policies, like the use of bioinputs to reduce use of fertilizer and pesticides. That it's important for us, and Brazil has a tradition for biological nitrogen fixation. You have more than 35 million hectares being producing in soybean producing with no adding nitrogen fertilizer, only by biological nitrogen fixation, and some other examples. And how to connect this with energy. So it's in Brazil has a different conditions that keep us the possibility to have food plus fuel. We have no competition on production on energy and food on the same area by the use of integrated system and the second crop that we can have in our conditions. So to conclude here, our vision for 2035, that it's the time of this new NDC. Brazil aims for a low-carbon future with climate resilience and just unite society, economic sectors, and federal entities for ecological transformation. It is a construction that involves the whole of government, whole of society, and whole of economy to promote common but different responsibilities also in domestic level. You should remember that Brazil is almost a continent.
Yes.
So we have this in domestic level too. And to integrate this agriculture and food system, we are working and proposing a specific approach based on science approach that we are calling respect principles. So that includes resilience, efficiency, science, people, energy, commitment to change, and trade. I will not detail here, but I can share with you later what it means, each of these principles. But this is a way to connect the agriculture, to put farms in the center, but to look on a food system approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. That's a great example of the wider range of actions that can be undertaken and also the interlinkages across them, right? We're talking about food systems and forests, but you're also talking about energy and the intersection between both. You're talking about land use planning. You're also talking about existing policy instruments to take into account, and this shouldn't be planned on a vacuum, but also considering existing policies and actions already there. So that's a great example. We want to leave some space for questions from the public. So I'll just go through one last round of questions for each of you, and hopefully you can make it short. But maybe let me start with Carissa. If you could also, beyond Indonesia and Brazil, I know you've also been working and collaborating with other countries around enhancing nature and NDC. Do you have any other particular example that excites you or that you would like to also share briefly around how other countries are tackling this exciting challenge?
Thanks, Mina. So in the Nature and NDCs guide, we, as Sissy was saying about his, there's a lot of different case studies in the, in there that highlight lots of different ways that countries are thinking about, nature and their NDCs. I think that, we, in Chile, actually, in neighboring Brazil, they have a really great, a really holistic, I think, forest target, especially around restoration and thinking through as well. They have a lot of timber, timber production there, and so thinking through with forests as well. I mean, conserving primary forests, but also thinking about the, productive value, bioeconomy of forests as well. How can we make the value of forests, of ecosystems, be more than they are cutting them down, right? And so restoring the values, making them productive, and having a bioeconomy, whether that's timber, whether it's fruits, right, whether it's other traditional ecological values there. And so I do think that that Chile has a good example there of some holistic targets around their forest sector.
Super. Now that you mentioned Chile, another thing that I really like from their past NDC that we included in our guide was also the synergies between adaptation and mitigation. So for some specific circular economy oceans, when there's clear synergies between both, that approach to tackling them together is something that hopefully will happen and we'll see also in upcoming NDC. So that's a great one. Also, the question to you as well, Hasib, a short example of a specific country that you find has done something interesting around the food system side? Yes,
I think Kenya is when it comes under NDCs, they have set up a multi-stakeholder platform where they discuss, which brings together stakeholders from different sectors, which discusses policies, plans, strategies that can be integrated in food systems. Colombia is another really good example of including different aspects or components of food systems, including the inclusion of vulnerable or groups, marginalized groups like indigenous people, Afro-descendants, and local communities. Liberia is a good example of one of the countries that have considered dietary shifts in their NDCs as part of the developing and implementation of NDCs. There are a few good examples. But again, countries vary in their context, their needs, so it's important to keep that in mind and make sure that the policies, including the NDCs, actually address those needs and the context, and it's not one solution that fits all contexts.
I love that reflection. Definitely not a one-size-fits-all. And now that you mentioned a couple of African countries, it makes me think one of the other examples that we included was Angola, and specifically how they've quantified the cost of implementation of the NDC. So not to put you, Damien, on the spot with a finance question, but because you did touch on the forest finance part, I'm curious, is there a specific example where you think a country has done a good job in also not just setting targets, but also trying to advance towards a roadmap for financing the NDC and the forest target, something along those lines? Any interesting examples?
Yeah, I mean, not just because Marcelo sat next to me, and of course civil society will always say, the Brazil NDC needs to be more ambitious and, why arrange, but I do think that Brazil has shown some real leadership in the finance space. I think there are some clear instruments and tools within the Brazilian NDC, which I think is really encouraging, and I think Brazil's leadership on the Tropical Forest Finance Facility, I think, is a really exciting instrument that can really leverage finance for standing forests, which we know I talked about the role of primary forests earlier on, and I think looking for tools that really can bring in finance flows to those is really important. So yeah, I think there are other NDCs where finance is strong, but we definitely need to see more specificity around that.
That's great, thank you. Feji, so one last for you, and hopefully sure to leave space for questions, but we have many people here that are also from conservation organizations, like the ones that are here in the panel. What could we do better as non-party stakeholders to support you in your efforts to advance towards NDC implementation and design?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think all governments, I don't know, but Indonesia needs a lot of support from the organization, non-party stakeholders like you. I mean, Indonesia is currently as a part of Friend of Ocean and Climate, and I think we are also supported by NGOs, the Ocean Conservancy. So yeah, we have a lot of support from all of you. And one thing, maybe because I speak from the ocean perspective, because we don't have a negotiation on ocean, right? Not in special negotiation session. So this year we have a joint statement to be delivered tomorrow at the closing plenary, and maybe I can have your support as observers to echo the ocean voice to all parties and all the participants in the plenary session. I think that will mean a lot. So the policy, and then at the implementation also, we have for us, we have limited national budget for the implementation. So usually we have a strong collaboration with all of you. I think right now we have a lot of projects together with development partners. We call it development partners, including the pilot projects, the survey, the research, and everything. So it will be like with we're using a roadmap as a base for us, all of us. So everybody can do their part, but we still have a clear roadmap ahead.
Super.
I think thank you.
The last one for Marcelo, and now that Brazil's a bit more advanced in presenting the NDC, if you had to give one advice to a country that's about to begin the process of enhancing nature, what would it be?
It's important to talk a lot among all sectors of the economy, because to build a commitment around the sustainable development, should include the whole society. And we know that there are different interests between different sectors, and sometimes they are contradictory. Yeah, but we must find some halfway on that. So, because that I said that the ambitions have they have some, a lot of face on ambition, because we should keep in mind that principles that should guide our construction of the NDCs, like the development, the social justice, and so on. Just for one example, in the Amazon region, we have 30 million people living there. They need to have economical way of life, livelihood. So it's not possible you just say, yeah, you just keep the forest. Okay, but how I will live? So we must find ways to have some economical issues there, economic activities there that can keep the forestry, that keep biodiversity, but generate income for these people.
Super.
So this is very important.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you all in Brazil next year.
Damien, you want to?
Yeah, sorry just to jump in, but I think you just made a really good point. And one of the things that I should have mentioned in my opening and the slides was the fact that indigenous peoples and local communities is mentioned in around half of NDCs, which might sound like quite a good thing, right? But again, it comes down to specificity. And, you know, I think, it's really important, as you said, the whole of society approach must include indigenous peoples and traditional rights holders. But actually, I think, and it's been a very loud message here, I think, in COP, that we really need to include, rights and tenure rights and things also within NDCs. So I really hope that's also a strong recommendation for policymakers going forward.
I think that's a great one, and that's something that hopefully we'll also see come from the NCQG discussions that are happening right now, right? Making sure finance flows to people who need it the most, including indigenous peoples that protect around 25% of the world's carbon sinks and aren't receiving enough finance. So that's great. Maybe we have space for one question. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Cynthia Soto from Wetlands International. Well, there are many things very interesting that were said today, but I want to emphasize one that was said by the distinguished representative from Indonesia. She mentioned that sometimes they put a sector, and then when they're ready, they put a number. And I think that's a very important statement, because that demonstrates the political will of the government of the country of putting a sector or a topic in the NDC. So when it comes to enhancing nature in NDCs, for example, if a country wants to include, or is uncertain about including, for example, peatlands in their NDCs, because they don't know the extension, the condition, the metrics, etc., it's important that they still include it, because that would activate, well, first it shows the political will, but that will also activate the different mechanisms that are there to support the country to develop or to implement the NDCs. And the NDC partnership where we are right now is one of them. So it's important then that we talk about, a whole of society, whole of government approach, but let's also talk about whole of ecosystems approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that final reflection. We don't have that much space left, but I think they're all pretty accessible, so you can go and ask them directly any question. I just want to end by thanking you all for coming and giving also the heads up that right now we have a statement that N4C released to try to raise ambition in the NCQG, specifically on nature, where we see that there's still clear gaps on the text. So please reach out to our colleagues N4C in case you want to sign the statement. We already have more than 80 organizations that have signed it, so we really want to push for that ambition. And please, I'll go back to the slides with the QR codes in case you want to take pictures and access the PDF. I'll go through all of them, so you can hopefully in the next 2 minutes take pictures if you'd like. But with that, thank you for a great set of speakers, and for all of you to join, for joining us. And please reach out. This is something that we all will collectively be supporting governments, hopefully, as they pursue and enhance their NDCs in the lead up to COP30. Thank you all.